All right. I think maybe we can now start this session. We are all energized by delicious food, and now we have ahead of us a wonderful collection of 5 brief 10-minute presentations, and I will try to keep up the time. So I will try to be strict. Let's see how I will manage to do that. So the first presenter today is online. She's Tanya Clement from University of Texas at Austin. And her title is AVAnnotate, creating scholarly editions and exhibits with IIIF and audiovisual archives. Tanya, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon or good morning where I am. Let me share my screen with you. I hope you have had a delicious lunch. I'm still on my coffee. Let's see. Started. Oops. Click it. So first I'd like to introduce my team because it is a multidisciplinary collaborative team. It's myself. I work with Ben and Sarah from Broomfield Labs. Some of you might know them from the page, which is a crowdsourcing application for creating collections. Zoe Burstein-Illingworth, who's a postdoc, Trent Wintermeyer, and Luke Sumter, who are undergraduate students. This project was initially funded by the American Council for Learned Society and currently is on the second round of funding from Mellon. Perhaps more importantly is our project partners. The project partners are particularly important because part of what we're doing in this project is creating use cases of people working with AV collections. So if you were working with audiovisual collections, please reach out and we'd be happy to work with you. I have a lot of staff right now who can run workshops, etc. But the project partners we're working with is Spoken Web Research Program out of Canada, the Woodbury Poetry Room at Harvard, the Library of Congress Digital Innovation Lab, Furious Flower Poetry Center, the Harry Ransom Center at the University of Texas, the Fortunoff Video Archive for Holocaust Testimonies, the Nettie Lee Benson Latin American Collections with Oral Histories, Sign Change, which is a linguistics research center project for people with impaired hearing, No Boundaries Project, which is dance, Chicana por mi raza, which is also oral histories. And I bring up these project partners just to demonstrate that the tool works with all kinds of audio and video from different disciplines and is sort of genre and discipline agnostic in a way. So why did we create this application? Archival AV has a lot of accessibility problems that digitization only addresses partially, including copyright and permissions, sensitive material, a lack of descriptive metadata oftentimes. Sometimes you get a video or an audio in your archive and you don't even really know what's on it unless you listen to it, and there aren't that many people to listen to things. A lack of tools for basic scholarly methods such as annotation, description, presentation. So we have a lot of ways in the classroom of working with images. We have a lot of ways in the classroom of working with text, but it is quite difficult to pass around an audio file or a video file, annotate it, share your thoughts about it, and do that in a way that is stable and appropriate, I guess. So our goal was to facilitate the collection, storing, and sharing of timestamped notes about AV recordings. So what is it exactly? The Broomfield Labs created an application in Ruby on Rails. It is minimal computing. We do use GitHub as well, so it's all free. And we create our exhibits and editions in GitHub. What we do is we create, the app generates IIIF manifests or takes in IIIF manifests and puts them with other directories and Jekyll templates into your GitHub repository. So you have everything. Users upload their annotations and a URL to their AV items. So we don't hold any of this. There's no database. everything sits in your GitHub repository, and the AV items often come from the hosting institutions themselves. So you would have a URL or, again, an existing manifest, but you don't have to have an existing manifest, IIIF manifest. So AVAnnotate, like I said, uses Jekyll and GitHub Pages to create a static site on GitHub. The project, like I said, we're trying to promote working with IIIF. We're trying to promote working with audio and visual artifacts and teaching and research. So a lot of what we produce is documentation on how to use it, examples with workshops and videos. So why IIIF for AV? IIIF, as many of you know, is a standard that was created so libraries and archives could one of the I's is image, could share image files and people could use them in third-party applications in interesting ways. Well, now IIIF has created a standard in the last few years for AV. So it now includes another access, which is duration. But what we're finding is that people don't really know how to use it. So in this project, we're trying very hard to give people a way to use it. We create the IIIF manifest, as I said, but we also, when you upload your annotations to the application, we associate those annotations with the IIIF manifest. So we generate a new IIIF manifest. If you don't know anything about IIIF, it's still sitting in your GitHub repository. So it is produced as a standard-based representation of the knowledge that you've created, but it's there for libraries and archives as well if you wanted to do a round trip. So let's say, for example, with the Fortunoff collection at Yale, they have a lot of people that come in and work with Holocaust testimonies, fellows, and what they want to be able to do is prop up a project on the side, work on it, and then harvest that project back into their main repository, their DAMs. With IIIF as a basis under it, that's a much easier process. So this is how easy it is. The first step is to log into AVAnnotate, or AVAnnotate is what we're calling it now, because we also use video with GitHub credentials. If you don't have a direct link, you can also create projects. I have created a project out of Harvard where they're not actually quite ready to share the AV materials yet, and you can still create a project. I think of it kind of like liner notes. So I have transcriptions of what the people were saying. I have notes about what they're saying in my project, and I actually don't even have a direct link yet. If you do have a direct link, as I mentioned, the application will create a IIIF manifest for you. If you have a IIIF manifest, which a lot of libraries and archives do produce, you can just pull that into the system, and then the first thing you have to do is create your own annotations. It is not a tool for creating annotations, it is a tool for presenting annotations. So you would add your annotations to AVAnnotate, and then following the green boxes, customize your project, including a scholarly apparatus like an introduction, which I'll show you some examples in a second, and an index. So some of the scholarly use cases that you can find, and the URL that I'll provide for you, is a bilingual digital edition of archival radio held at Lelis Benson. This was produced, oh, it's gone. We'll get that link created again. This is another, this was the digital anthology created with resources from the Spoken Web collection. This is an introduction that was written by Zoe Burstein-Illingworth, a postdoc working on the project. And then these are various projects that people have produced with their own introduction, but also audiovisual files where you can play them. You can click on the
we're gonna I'm gonna read
on the timestamp. It takes you to that place in the recording. You can search on them and get to what you need on the page. And this is basically just propped up. It takes about 5 minutes to make a project. If you have your own annotations, the hard part, of course, as usual, is the scholarly work. Another project, like I said, we also work with video. And this is a video project where a student has taken a video from the Internet Archive and has created her annotations This project is also interesting because it allows you to work with hypothesis. So she created additional annotations. The community can come in. We don't work with hypothesis, but because we're using IIIF standard and we're using standard web application, annotation standards, it does interact with things like hypothesis, so the public can come in and also create annotations. Other examples include, so I'll show you an example of the index. This is a project that I've created with recordings from the Library of Congress of Zora Neale Hurston. One of the things that we also create is an index. So I can go into my Zora Neale Hurston index item and find all the places where she speaks across the 3 recordings that I have here. I've also created an introduction. So as you can see from these examples, the tool is really meant to facilitate. I also have a bunch of classroom use cases that are interesting to see, as well as this comparison screen. These are 2 videos of a silent screen. We have one set of annotations on the left, another set of annotations on the right. It's the same film, and you can get to the places, the timestamp places on each of the films side by side to compare. So I'm about out of time, but I did want to leave you with these links to places where you can find more information, more examples, documentation, and also please feel free to reach out. As I said, we're actively running workshops and have people on staff to help. So thank you.
Thank you. Lovely talk. Now there is 5 minutes time for questions. Maybe as others are still thinking, I would actually like to ask, because you said that you are using these different annotation standards, annotation standards in your work. So, and then you have this wonderful collection of different kinds of user cases. So have you had kind of like, what is the, like often people might, even if you have like certain standards, people might interpret them in a little bit different ways. So could you talk a little bit more about this, if you have encountered these kinds of issues in your work?
Yes. So the tool is very simple and requires you to upload a CSV or a spreadsheet of any kind with your annotations on it. And propping up a project, like I said, is free. It's easy. But the hardest part is creating the annotations in the first place, which is I think relevant to your question, Claire. And we get questions like that from communities all of the time. And part of what we're doing in this Mellon grant is trying to collect some kind of guidelines, but at the same time, we're particularly interested in guidelines on protocols for access and discovery in archives and collections, because what we're finding is the bottleneck is not only, the question that I hear you asking is more of a disciplinary question, like how do you do the annotations, which isn't really, is really up to the user community, right? So to a certain extent, the tool is agnostic about how you do the annotations, what kind of annotations you do. But what we're finding is the bottleneck is that because people don't use a lot of AV in more traditional humanities disciplines outside of oral histories per se, like I work with a lot of archival audio recordings in literary study, which isn't necessarily pervasive. In that context, there aren't a lot of guidelines. In oral history, there are a lot of guidelines, suggested ways of creating these annotations. And we're not so interested in replicating that work because I feel like that community is extremely robust. But I do find that it's an interesting question because I do find the hardest thing for people is the intellectual aspect of creating annotations and not the means of pulling them together. And for me, the reason that that's so interesting is because unless you have a method for sharing and presenting your annotations, those questions of how do I do annotations don't even necessarily come up.
Yes, I totally agree. Any other questions? Yes, please, Scott.
Just quickly, thank you, Tanya. You said you were working with the No Boundaries project, so I know Rebecca Seltzer pretty well.
Oh, great.
How is the, that's a good question about how you're annotating, how they're annotating. Have they begun really doing annotation work? It's been a little while since I've been in touch.
Well, this is, it is an interesting question. So I am working closely with Giselle and Rebecca, and I have 2 students in a class that I'm teaching this semester, and their primary focus is annotating dance. Like, what does it mean to annotate dance? Back to Claire's question, I think the hardest, and obviously the point of this conference, the hardest part isn't necessarily, how do you present your annotations, but what does it even mean to do that work? And so I think that the No Boundaries project has been primarily focused on pulling together the collections, getting them described in a way and made accessible. And all of these are kind of a chicken and the egg scenario. So you have these issues of accessibility, you have these more, that seem to fall on the side of libraries and archives. And then you find these issues of annotations, which seem to fall in the boundaries of disciplinary, guidelines and frameworks, and what the community wants to produce, what's responsible to produce. And then in the middle, you have the means of bringing those 2 kinds of communities together, which is, I feel like, where we're sitting. And the No Boundaries project is a great example of that. So they are really trying right now they've just launched their project. Giselle just launched it at a conference, I think a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. And they are now thinking of, well, now that we have these artifacts, these AV artifacts around dance, what are people going to do with it? And so then they're becoming more interested, I think, in the questions of annotation.
Thank you.
We have time for one more question.
Thank you. Hi, Tanya. It's Susan Brown.
Hey, Susan.
Hi, I was hoping to see you here.
Yeah.
I was interested to see the page where the annotations from AVAnnotate were interacting with hypothesis annotations, and it sounded like it went beyond a standard hypothesis annotation of the page. Like, what kind of interoperability is happening there that wasn't evident?
Well, basically, it is the basic hypothesis interaction to the page. So what you have on the page that I showed you is text. So essentially, it's a website. We generate Jekyll pages, so it's HTML. They're basic web pages for the most part. So in other ways, they will interact with other plugins like accessibility plugins that read the page, because they have all the standard, blocks of information that one needs in order to do that kind of thing. But the hypothesis interaction was really, we just tried it one day, and it turned out to be really useful. In the digital anthology project, Zoe actually used hypothesis to interact with the writers of the various parts of the anthology. So they would submit their projects, and Zoe would go in and actually give them annotations using hypothesis on top of their projects. And what's really nice about hypothesis too is if you include the timestamp in your highlighting of the annotation, it's included in the hypothesis annotation, and you can download that and then re-upload any of the comments that someone makes. So you can actually use the output from hypothesis, upload it back into your project and create this kind of loop where you can continue to include annotations produced by a collaborator or another annotator, or, you know, community comments, whatever you wanted to do, which is also particularly interesting to communities like the Furious Flower Black Poetry Center at James Madison University, because they've been, for decades, they've been doing these conferences where they share the poetry with the community, and they really wanted to find a way to, well, how do we get the community back in to annotate or to, you know, add their thoughts into a particular collection? Well, that's a way, an easy way to do it online, and then the, you know, the Furious Flower people can decide, do we want to pull these in? Do we want to, you know, do something else with them? So we're really sort of at the beginnings of trying to figure out, like, how does this work as a way to pull in annotations, but also do a kind of virtuous circle with archives and collections, so that if they find these annotations useful over here on the side, let's say you create something in a class, you're creating these annotations, you've got these great projects in GitHub, you can pull those in, but then we've all taught, and we know that sometimes students' projects are not that great, and they'll sit over there in GitHub and then eventually disappear and go away, you know? So there's, you know, there's a way in which it provides a sandbox to work with these collections.
Super, thank you.
Thank you. Please join me to thank Tanya once again.
Thank you.